James Harper sat on the edge of his faded armchair, the fabric worn thin under his hands. The clock ticked loudly, each second dragging like a weight across the quiet of his small apartment. Outside, the late October wind rattled the window, scattering yellow leaves across the empty street. He held the crumpled wedding invitation in his trembling fingers, staring at it, as if it could explain the years of silence. He had not been invited. Not because he was unwanted, at least not entirely. It was because 5 years ago, in a moment of desperation and weakness, he had done something unforgivable. It had been a stormy night, and his daughter, Emily, was 16. James had come home drunk, frustrated from another day at the factory, and the argument had spiraled. Emily had begged him to stop yelling, to leave her room alone, but he hadn't. In a flash of anger, he had struck the wall with his fist, breaking a family heirloom, a glass music box that had belonged to Emily's late mother. The box shattered, its tiny ballerina toppling helplessly to the floor. Emily had screamed, not at him, but at the sound of it breaking. That sound, she said later, haunted her dreams for months. Her mother had already been gone for 3 years. That music box was the last connection to a life she barely remembered. In that instant, she saw her father not as a protector, but as a man who could destroy the few things she loved. She ran out of the house that night, vowing silently that she would never let him close again. Since then, Emily had built walls around her heart. Every attempt at reconciliation had been met with silence or averted eyes. James tried, letters, phone calls, birthdays, but nothing reached her. And now, 5 years later, her wedding. He had found out through a mutual friend, the news landing like a physical blow to his chest. He would not be invited. She had made it very clear. The apartment smelled of old coffee and mothballs, a scent that had clung to the place since his wife's death. James rubbed his eyes and let out a long sigh. He tried to imagine Emily walking down the aisle, the soft lace of her gown brushing the floor, her smile directed at a man who was not him. The thought was unbearable. Yet, he knew he could not stay away. Not now, not ever. Hours later, he dressed in his best suit, one that had not seen the light of day in years. The fabric was stiff, the color faded, but he straightened the tie with care, whispering to himself, just one look. One moment. The taxi ride to the country club was quiet except for the occasional bump in the road. James held the edge of the seat, knuckles white, and stared out at the dark trees passing by like silent witnesses to his regrets. When he arrived, the lights of the venue spilled onto the empty parking lot. Couples laughed as they stepped inside, and a faint melody of a string quartet drifted into the night air. James hesitated, the invitation burning in his pocket. He was a stranger now, an intruder in a life that had moved on without him. Yet the need to see his daughter, Emily, his little girl who once clung to his knees during thunderstorms, was stronger than the shame that weighed down his chest. He lingered in the shadows, watching her from the edge of the hall as she laughed with friends, radiant in her wedding dress. The dress clung to her like the memory of a dream he had long forgotten. Her hair was pinned with delicate flowers, her eyes bright with joy and excitement. And yet, when their gazes crossed for the briefest second, she looked away, a flicker of recognition passing behind the veil of her carefully constructed composure. James pressed his lips together to hold back the tremor of tears. His breath came shallow, quick, betraying the storm inside him. He knew that even if he stepped forward, even if he tried to reach her, the chasm of years and pain would not vanish with a single embrace. And so he stayed, silent, watching, loving her from the distance that fate had cruelly carved. By the time the last vows were exchanged and the champagne glasses clinked, James felt a hollow ache in his chest. The celebration was not his to join. He lingered long enough to see Emily smile at her new husband, then quietly slipped away into the night, unseen, leaving the warmth of the party behind. Back in his apartment, the silence welcomed him like an old friend. He sat in his armchair, the shadows of the room thick around him. His heart ached not just for the lost moments of the past, but for the ones he would never have again. And in that quiet, he made a vow to leave her a final message, one that could not be ignored. He picked up a piece of paper, his hand shaking, and wrote simply, "I may not have been invited, but I am always proud of you. Always." The ink smeared slightly as his tears fell, but he pressed it into an envelope, addressed it to Emily, and set it on the table. Tomorrow, it would reach her hands. And for now, he let himself weep, alone but full of a love that had never diminished. The morning sunlight spilled across Emily's bedroom, brushing her pale face with a soft warmth. Her wedding dress was carefully folded on the chair, the delicate lace still faintly smelling of roses from the night before. The house was quiet, the laughter and music from last night replaced by the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. Emily sat at the edge of the bed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Despite the joy of yesterday, a shadow lingered in her chest, a shadow she could not quite name. The absence of one person had been glaringly obvious. She had not wanted him there, and yet, somewhere deep inside, a hollow pang of guilt twisted in her stomach. Her mother's music box had been broken 5 years ago. James had struck it in a drunken rage, shattering not just the glass ballerina, but something fragile inside Emily herself. She had never forgiven him. She had tried to erase him from her life, building a world where she didn't need him. But now, looking at the empty space beside the armchair where a man should have stood to witness her happiness, the memory of that night returned with cruel clarity. There was a knock at the door. Emily frowned. "Come in," she said, her voice steady though her heart skipped a beat. It was the mail carrier, holding a single envelope, unassuming and plain. Emily took it, noting the familiar, shaky handwriting on the front. Her breath caught. James Harper. Her hands trembled as she turned it over, recognizing the penmanship she had spent years trying to forget. Slowly, she tore it open. The note inside was brief. She read it once, then twice. "I may not have been invited, but I am always proud of you. Always." Time seemed to stretch. The walls of her room pressed inward, the floor beneath her knees suddenly too hard. Her fingers shook as she clutched the paper, her mind replaying memories she had buried. Nights he had stayed up with her when she was sick, the way he had lifted her onto his shoulders at the county fair, the stories he used to tell her before bedtime. The moments of love, lost in anger and distance, flooded her with an ache that brought tears to her eyes. She sank to the floor, letting the envelope slip from her fingers. The note lay on the carpet like a lifeline she had been too proud to reach for. For the first time in years, Emily felt the weight of her resentment clash violently with a memory of love that refused to fade. Her phone buzzed. A text from her husband. "Everything okay?" She stared at it, but couldn't reply. How could she explain that a simple piece of paper had shaken the foundation of her carefully constructed life? That the man she had kept out of her heart still held the power to make her cry with guilt and longing? She remembered the wedding, the moment their eyes had met, brief and charged with unspoken emotions. She had looked away, afraid of the flood that would come if she allowed herself to truly see him. And now, here was the proof of his enduring love, patient and unyielding, even in absence. Hours passed. Emily remained on the floor, staring at the note. The clock ticked, the sun moved across the sky, but she did not move. When she finally stood, her reflection in the mirror was unfamiliar. Her eyes were red, her hair disheveled, and yet there was something new there, a quiet understanding, a bridge forming where only a chasm had existed before. She would have to confront the past. Not today, perhaps, not tomorrow, but one day. For now, the note remained in her hand, and she allowed herself a single, silent whisper. I forgive you." It was not spoken aloud, yet it felt like the first step toward healing a wound she had carried for too long. And somewhere, deep down, Emily knew that despite years of silence, love had never left them both. James Harper woke to the sound of his own coughing. The small apartment, dimly lit by a single bedside lamp, smelled faintly of medicine and stale air. The autumn wind rattled the window again, colder than ever, and he shivered beneath his thin blanket. His chest ached, deep and relentless, as if the years of regret had finally carved themselves into his bones. He had tried to ignore it at first, blaming fatigue or the lingering chill of the season. But each morning grew harder. Walking across the apartment felt like dragging weights behind him. The days blurred together. Brief trips to the pharmacy, watching the news, staring at the clock, wondering if it was too late to fix what had been broken. James thought of Emily constantly. Her wedding, her absence, her forgiveness still unknown to him. He remembered the note he had left on the table, carefully written, ink smudged by his tears. That simple act was his final attempt to reach her, to tell her he was proud, that despite everything, he had never stopped loving her. One evening, he sank into his armchair, the shadows in the room pressing close. He closed his eyes, picturing her in the wedding dress, the way her hair fell over her shoulders, the soft curve of her smile. His heart ached with a longing that words could not touch. The phone rang. He didn't answer. He knew it was probably a friend checking in, but he couldn't bring himself to speak. Each sound hurt. Each movement felt like a betrayal of his failing body. He leaned back, listening to the hum of the radiator and the faint rustle of leaves outside, trying to remember a time when things had been simpler. At night, he dreamed of her, not as the adult she had become, but as the little girl who had once clung to him in the dark, begging him to read just one more story. In the dream, he held her hand, and she looked at him with those wide, trusting eyes. But dreams faded, and he awoke to the hollow silence of the apartment, her absence echoing louder than any sound. His body was failing faster now. The doctor had warned him weeks ago. The heart was weak, the lungs fragile. But James did not fear death, not entirely. He feared leaving without leaving something behind, a piece of himself that could bridge the distance he had allowed to grow between them. One morning, he sat at the table, the note lying beside him. He touched it gently, feeling the ridges of the ink. "She has to know," he whispered to the empty room. "She has to know I am proud." He spent hours writing again, adding little details, memories of bedtime stories, the first bicycle ride, the taste of homemade cookies on Sunday mornings. Each line was a stitch in the fabric of their past, a fragile attempt to mend the years of silence. When he was finished, he placed the letter in an envelope and set it carefully on the kitchen table, imagining Emily finding it, imagining her understanding, imagining her forgiving. By the afternoon, exhaustion had claimed him. He sank into the armchair one last time, the room spinning gently around him. The envelope remained on the table, a testament to love that had survived neglect, distance, and silence. And as his eyelids closed, he whispered a final prayer, not for himself, but for her. "Be happy, Emily, always." The apartment was quiet, the wind outside shifting the leaves into small piles along the curb. Inside, James Harper slept, perhaps forever, leaving behind a simple note and a lifetime of love too long unspoken. Emily Harper had spent the morning tidying up the house, trying to restore normalcy after the whirlwind of her wedding. The sunlight poured through the windows, soft and golden, illuminating the small imperfections she had been too busy to notice yesterday. A chipped plate in the kitchen, a forgotten sock on the staircase, a smudge of dust on the piano. Everything felt ordinary, and yet, the absence of one presence made the world feel hollow. Then came the phone call. "Mrs. Harper?" The voice on the line was formal, heavy with hesitation. "This is Dr. Monroe. I'm afraid your father, James Harper, passed away last night." Emily's hand froze over the dish she was washing. The sound of running water filled the sudden silence in her ears, but she barely heard it. The world tilted. She tried to speak, to say something, but the words refused to form. Her chest tightened painfully, and tears sprang unbidden to her eyes. She remembered the wedding, the fleeting moment when their eyes met. The guilt, sharp and bitter, that she had buried deep, now surged through her. She had told herself it was right, that he had hurt her, that she needed distance. And yet, knowing he was gone, that final chance was lost forever, crushed her. Hours later, when her husband returned from the arrangements, Emily wandered into her father's apartment with a heavy heart. The space was small, as it had always been, and smelled faintly of medicine and old books. On the kitchen table lay an envelope, neatly placed, addressed in the familiar shaky handwriting she had once tried to forget. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. The paper was thick, the ink slightly smudged, as though touched by tears. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Slowly, she opened it. Inside was a single note. "I may not have been invited, but I am always proud of you. Always." Her knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, clutching the letter to her chest. The room seemed to shrink around her as memories came rushing back. The nights he stayed up with her when she was sick, the first time he held her on his shoulders at the county fair, the way he had tucked her in and whispered stories to chase away the dark. The ache in her chest was unbearable. She pressed the letter to her face, breathing in the faint scent of his cologne still lingering on the envelope. Tears ran freely now, hot and relentless, soaking the paper. She whispered his name, a sound filled with regret, sorrow, and longing. Dad, I'm sorry. She thought of the wedding, of the moment she had looked away, the walls she had built, and the pride he had left her despite it all. The years of silence, the anger, the heartbreak, all of it seemed to collapse into that single sentence on a piece of paper. Her husband knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder, silent but steady. She clutched the letter tighter, letting herself cry, letting the grief pour out in waves. For the first time in years, Emily truly understood. Love, her father's love, had never faltered. It had endured distance, pain, and rejection. It had waited patiently, quietly, unconditionally. Hours later, when the storm of her emotions had calmed into a trembling stillness, Emily placed the letter in a small wooden box. She could not change the past, could not bring him back, but she could carry his love forward. And in that quiet moment, she finally whispered again, I forgive you and I love you. The words lingered in the air, fragile and true, a bridge over years of silence, a testament to the enduring power of parental love. The apartment was still. Emily sat in the corner of her father's living room, the letter resting in her lap like a fragile relic. The sun had dipped low, painting the walls with long shadows, and the air smelled faintly of autumn leaves drifting in through the open window. For hours she had done nothing but read and reread the words, each time feeling them sink deeper into her chest. She remembered the anger she had carried for so long, years of clinging to resentment, replaying the night when he broke the music box, the memory of his drunken shouting echoing through the halls of her childhood home. She had thought she needed to punish him, to protect herself. And yet, those years of silence had not healed anything. They had only widened the gap between them. Now, faced with his final message, she understood something she had resisted for too long. His love had never faltered. Even in absence, even in her rejection, he had remained proud of her. It was a love that demanded nothing, not forgiveness, not even acknowledgement. Emily closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine him, not the angry, broken man of her memory, but the father who had quietly loved her through everything. She remembered waking up in the middle of the night to find him sitting in her room, reading softly so she could sleep. She remembered the warmth of his hand on her shoulder at the school play, the gentle pride in his eyes even when she stumbled. A sob escaped her, uncontrollable and deep, shaking her shoulders. She pressed the letter against her heart, feeling the faint ridges of his handwriting, the physical proof of a love she had denied herself. I can't change the past, she whispered, voice barely audible. But I can carry this with me. I can remember him as he truly was. Her husband watched quietly from the doorway, his presence steady and unintrusive. Emily clutched the letter tightly, feeling both the weight of grief and the strange, delicate lift of relief. It was as though, for the first time, the world had shifted slightly, the edges softened. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the street below where the leaves swirled in small eddies. A single golden leaf caught her eye, spiraling down and landing on the curb. She smiled faintly, as if seeing a sign, a reminder that life continued, and that love, true, patient, enduring love, remained even in absence. Emily returned to the letter one last time, placing it carefully in a small wooden box she had found in the apartment. She would take it home, keep it with her, not as a symbol of loss, but as a testament to the bond that had survived everything. For the first time since her father's death, she felt a quiet peace settle in her chest. The anger and resentment had not disappeared, but they no longer defined her. Instead, there was understanding, compassion, and a new commitment to carry forward the love her father had left behind. I love you, Dad, she whispered again, this time with a note of acceptance. I always will. And in the soft hush of the apartment, Emily Harper felt the beginnings of true reconciliation, not just with her father, but with herself. Emily Harper returned home that evening, the wooden box with her father's letter clutched tightly to her chest. The house was quiet, the remnants of wedding celebrations now reduced to soft echoes in the corners. She placed the box carefully on her nightstand, then sat on the edge of the bed, staring at it as if it held all the answers to questions she had carried for years. Her thoughts drifted back to the day she ran out of the house, after the music box shattered. She had been so young, so afraid of being hurt again, so determined to protect herself from disappointment. And yet, every memory of her father's love now came rushing back, unfiltered and raw. The bedtime stories, the scraped knees he had kissed better, the way he had always, even imperfectly, tried to be there for her. Tears blurred her vision as she opened the box. The note rested inside, the ink smudged in places from his trembling hand, or maybe from the tears he had shed in silence. She read it again. I may not have been invited, but I am always proud of you. Always. It was so simple, so honest, so enduring. And in that simplicity, Emily felt the weight of years of anger, guilt, and longing lift slightly from her chest. She pressed the letter to her face, letting herself weep freely, her body shaking with the intensity of grief and love entwined. I should have forgiven you sooner, she whispered, her voice breaking. I should have held you instead of running away. I should have told you I loved you. The words hung in the air, unanswered except by the memories themselves. But somehow, in that silent room, she felt his presence, not as a ghost, but as the lingering warmth of a love that had never wavered. She thought of the wedding, the brief moment when their eyes had met, the glance she had quickly turned away from in fear of her emotions. And now, holding this final message, she finally understood. The invitation he never received had not mattered. The pride, the love, the devotion, those were gifts he had given her unconditionally, without expectation, without ceremony. Emily folded the letter carefully, placing it back in the box. She felt a strange, gentle peace settling in her chest, a quiet bridge stretching across the years of silence and distance between them. She understood now that love could endure beyond anger, beyond mistakes, beyond absence. It could survive everything. She sat there for a long time, letting the tears flow and then slowly subside. And finally, she whispered one last time, I forgive you, Dad, and I love you. Always. The words lingered in the quiet room, a testament to a bond that had never truly been broken. And in that moment, Emily Harper felt her father's love surround her completely, not through presence, not through invitation, but through the unshakable truth of a heart that had never stopped being proud.